I don't know about y'all, but I'm pretty much sick and tired of hearing about the world's problems and nobody offering any concrete solutions. Let me know if y'all can relate with this, but this is becoming the bane of my existence. Because fact of the matter is, there are a lot of problems in the world right now. There's a lot of problems in society. But it's one of those things where everybody just keeps talking about them. You know, and it's one thing to just talk about the problems and highlight the fact that they are there. But the only thing that does is just leads to fear-mongering. It leads to mass hysteria and people just reacting because everybody gets stuck in this fear-based mentality. And when you're stuck in that fear-based mentality, the only thing you can do is react. You lose the ability to think critically and think logically about your situation, and it makes it very hard for people to find solutions to their own problems in their own lives. I just can't stand the fact that people are out there just talking about this stuff, and you know, they'll put the information out, here's what's going on, and then it stops there. And don't get me wrong, it pays to be informed. Knowing what's going on around us is the first step to finding a solution, because you can't find a solution to a problem that you're not aware of. So awareness is key. But it seems like there's a lot more awareness and very, very little actual problem solving. The problem here, I think, is that when people put this information out, not just the fact that it puts people in this fear mentality and they can't think clearly, but another problem is that a lot of the solutions that people are coming up with, they're not going to work, because the typical solution to a lot of our problems is voting your way out. Everybody thinks that some sort of hero or some savior is going to come along and rescue us. So everybody sits back and waits for that to happen. They wait for that next person to get in office and save the day. But if history has proven anything, it's that we are not voting our way out of this situation. It's simply not going to happen, because the people that get in office, they have other interests to maintain, and those interests are not in the best interest of the people 99.9% of the time. So thinking that we're going to vote our way out of this is not going to work. Waiting for that person to come along and save the day is not going to work. And that's where I think the paradox comes in, because everybody thinks that the answers to our prayers and the solutions to our problems are very complicated. Everybody likes to overblow all this stuff and make it seem like it's all in vain and there's really no way out. There's no escape because everything is too hard. That an individual, average, everyday person can't make a change. But from my experience and from what I have witnessed, that could not be further from the truth. And from my perspective, it seems to me like the answer to our problems lies within us. It lies within each other. And I think that's the first solution to solving most of our problems, is stop being so doggone divided. We need to quell the division and come together. Because if there's one thing we can agree on, it is that we have a lot of problems. It is that we need to find solutions to those problems. But until we can come together over that idea and unite over something that we all have in common, we'll never make that happen. Because one individual can make a difference, but the odds of that one individual making a difference is going to be very, very small. But if we have millions of individual people all united, working towards the same goal, the chances of us achieving that goal and solving our problem is going to be very, very high. So that's key. That's number one. And let's use an example here. So I keep hearing about the fact that we might be facing a food crisis because the price of everything's going up. The price of gas is going through the roof. That Strait of Hormuz or Hormuz, or however you say it, is closed down and boats can't get through. So that's a big problem. And everybody highlights this problem. Everybody talks about it. And the solution that I keep hearing is that we need to open the strait back up so that the boats can pass through. But what if there's another solution that is much simpler? Well, the good news is there is, and it's been right under our noses this entire time. And that solution is the fact that local farms and local businesses exist. And for the past 50 to 70 years, we've been driving them out of business because we, the people, have been choosing convenience over quality. We have been choosing big industry and these large corporations over our neighbors. And because of that, they can't keep up. So we have lost hundreds of thousands and millions of farms over the last 50 to 70 years. And that's a big problem because that makes us more and more reliant on big industry, and that has put us in this situation. Because if we had all of these farms that we used to have at our disposal, it wouldn't matter if the strait closed for good, because we would still have these local farmers to fall back on. So the solution to this problem is just voting with our dollars, choosing to spend our money in places where it's actually going to benefit us. Because the people that have the local farms, the people that have the local businesses, they have our best interests in mind, because how could they not? Their profit margins are so low and so slim. They have to produce the best quality food and the best products possible to even have a remote chance of competing with big industry. And yes, their stuff is going to be somewhat more expensive because of that, but the larger their customer base and the more loyal, the more they can lower their prices and pass their profits and their success on to the consumer. And that's just one example. There are many, many more examples of this. And this is where I think there's another major solution and another major opportunity for us to realize, is that we have vastly put ourselves in this position. And we don't take accountability for this enough. We don't like to think about this because it's kind of uncomfortable. It is very much an uncomfortable truth that most people don't want to face. And when you bring this up to people, they tend to be very combative and they get very emotional about it. And a lot of times, from what I've seen, when people get that way, it's because you're right on target. So we're going to go ahead and stay on target, and we're going to talk about this. But the fact of the matter is, we have put ourselves in this position for the vast majority of the problems that we face, because we have chosen convenience and commodities and lower quality goods to sacrifice price to save a couple bucks, instead of going with local family-owned businesses and things like that. We have put ourselves into this position when it comes to pretty much all basic goods, even all necessities. Most of the things that we buy in our lives today are imported from foreign countries, specifically China. And that's because we buy that stuff. The market goes where our money goes. And the market also goes where our attention goes. We are hooked on social media, and we're disconnected from one another way more than we've ever been throughout all of history, because our attention is focused on social media. It's focused on the internet. It's focused on not getting to know our neighbors. It's focused on not communicating face to face. So as you can see, we have put ourselves in this position. Yes, the people at the top have promoted this stuff. Yes, the big industries and the big corporations have definitely manipulated us, and they have created this atmosphere, but they've only done that because there's a ton of money involved. They harvest us and mine us for data because we are on these platforms. If we weren't on these platforms, they would not be able to do that. So it's high time that we realize that we do hold all of the power. I'm not even talking about a little bit, I'm talking about all the power. Because if we were to shift our attention and our money and our focus away from all these things that we're not happy with, those cabals, those industries, those whatever, fill in the blank, they would cease to exist. This is true for everything in society. A lot of people are unhappy with AI and the fact that AI data centers are coming in and basically consuming the natural world. There's a way out of that too. And it is the refusal, the blatant refusal of all of this technology. And I know that by saying that, I'm kind of reaching, because there's no way that every single person in society is going to boycott technology and they're going to get off the internet and stop using it. And I know that the government and the people at the top, the people in charge, they have other plans for AI lurking in the background that don't really involve us, the consumer. But fact of the matter is, if we push back against all that stuff, all the surveillance and all the control and all of the technology and the robots and all the stuff they have planned for us, and we truly stood our ground and we united en masse, they would roll this stuff back. And I have another prime example of this, and this is one that I wasn't even going to dive into, but I think this is worth mentioning. So I worked for almost 20 years of my life for a Fortune 500 company, a very, very large corporation, a very rich corporation that has a lot of power and a lot of influence in what I would say in the world. And when 2020 happened, they rolled out mandates and they said, you have to get this thing or you're fired. you're going to be out in the street. And instead of just rolling over and people just saying, okay, well, I guess I got to do what they say, 25% of my entire enterprise refused. They said, all right, I'll walk. I'm not willing to play your game. I'm not going to participate. And you know what they did? They not only rolled back what they said, but they granted exemptions for every single person that asked for them. And they even stated to our enterprise that they could not risk losing 25% of the workforce, and that's the reason they were making that decision. Imagine if all of us made that choice. All the stuff that was being forced down our throat would have stopped overnight. Again, this is true for everything. The price of gas going up, if people were willing to stay home and endure the discomfort and risk losing their job and sacrifice a little bit of discomfort now to avoid a lifetime of discomfort later, and they refused to leave their house and go to work and pay for the gas prices would come down. They would find a way to bring the gas prices down. If most of the workforce that the backbone of society hinges on were to stop participating, these things would be rolled back overnight. I've heard people talk about this for the food industry, because there are some people that worked in that industry, and they said that if as few as 5% of the people chose to push back, then the food industry would change their practices overnight. They would stop putting toxic ingredients in the food that we have here in the United States, because the fact of the matter is, they put that stuff in our food, but they don't put it in the countries overseas, because the countries overseas ban that food. They tell these companies that if you put those products in our food, it's not allowed in our country. So what do? They make an entirely different product for those countries, and they only allow it here because we stand for it. We continue to buy it and consume it. The same could also be said about paying taxes, because we are being taxed on everything. And I hear a lot of people talking about this, because people say, well, we need taxes for the schools and the roads and all the infrastructure, which may be true to an extent. But if you stop and think about how much we are actually being taxed, we are taxed on everything numerous times over. It's not just income tax. It's not just state tax. We're taxed when we spend money. We're taxed when we make money. We're taxed when we buy and sell things that have already had tax paid on them. We're taxed on things that we have owned our entire lives. A prime example of that, I've owned this property in my house for, 14, 15 years now, owned outright, yet I'm still paying property taxes. I've owned all my vehicles from day one because I paid cash for all of them, yet I'm still paying property tax on them. I started a business last year, and suddenly I had to start paying taxes on used computers that I bought, because they are considered assets and part of the business. Even though the computer was 10 years old and the taxes have already been paid on it, somehow I am now required to pay taxes on that computer and my office assets, simply because they're being used for business. Tell me how that makes sense. And if you think about how much I, as an individual person, pays out in taxes every single year, and then you multiply that by 324 million people, that is so much money, it's almost hard to comprehend. Yet somehow they need more. Somehow they want to tax us for the air that we breathe. To me, it just doesn't make sense. And the solution that I hear all the people talk about is that we need reform. We need tax reform. We need somebody to come in to lower taxes and change the policy. But again, this is where the solution doesn't have to be complicated. We don't need to wait for this savior to come in and save the day. We can solve this problem ourselves. Stop participating. And that is literally the solution to most of our problems. All we have to do to solve these things is to simply opt out. And the system does its very best to keep us stuck in fear, to keep us complacent and arguing amongst one another, so that we don't realize this. So that we don't realize that if we were to come together over these common ideas and these common interests, and we focused on a goal, that had our best interests in mind, then we would be able to solve most of the world's problems, or at least most of the problems in our immediate reality. They don't want us to see these things, and that is exactly why they keep us suppressed. That is exactly why they keep us divided. But I think it's high time that we realize this fact. And I think it's also high time that we take accountability for our actions and realize that what we're doing right now, by simply talking about all the problems and not discussing solutions and trying to find some common ground so that we can come together and solve these things, is not doing us any favors. It is keeping us in this perpetual state of our current existence, which is, quite frankly, kind of going downhill. And if we don't wise up to this stuff soon, it's going to continue to go downhill until we basically reach the point of no return. And at that point, then what do? The only thing we'll be able to do at that point is discuss the problems. We won't even have the option of discussing solutions, because we will be so suppressed and so controlled that everything we say is dictated and controlled by the people that are creating the problems in the first place. Because we now very much live in a world that creates the problem and then tries to sell us the solution. But the solution is always something that has an alternative agenda lurking in the background. It's always something that is aimed at stripping away more of our rights on the back end. It might solve some of the problems in the interim, and it might look good on paper, but there's always a catch. And the reason they put so much time, attention, and resources into trying to keep us distracted and trying to keep us preoccupied and arguing amongst ourselves is because they have realized that we are the most powerful asset on this planet. And more specifically, our mind and our collective consciousness is the most powerful asset on this planet. So it's high time that we remember that fact. And remember that we don't need to rely on them to solve our problems. The only people we need to rely on are ourselves. And when we do that, the only agenda involved is the fact that we win. And that is exactly what we will do.